Good day, sir. Today, I will tackle the exercise number 1 entitled Animal Cells and Tissue. Introduction. The cell theory states that all living organisms are made up of cells. Cells are the basic structural and functional units of life. Cells differ in size, shape, and function. These variations are correlated with the functions they perform. According to the structure, cells are generally classified either as prokaryotic or eukaryotic. According to function, animal cells are either somatic or reproductive. Multicellular organisms are made up of several cells. Cells that perform the same function are called tissue. Cells of a tissue may be of several kinds. Tissues are in turn grouped together to form organs. Organs group together to form a system, and all these comprise an organism. Objectives: to identify the commonly visible parts of an animal cell, to describe the major parts of cells and their functions, and to identify the described characteristics of animal tissues. Materials and methods. Light compound microscope prepares slides of the following: skeletal or muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, smooth muscle tissue, CS of a bone, CS of hyaline cartilage, human blood smear, frog or tod blood smear, adipose tissue, XS frog's ovary, and human sperm smear. Somatic tissues. First is epithelial tissues. Take note of the compact arrangement of cells and presence of basement membrane. Notice this thin and permeable membrane that binds the epithelium together and separates it from the underlying connective tissue. Observe carefully if the focused epithelium is composed of one layer of cells, or simple, or two or more layers called stratified. Under close inspection, you will notice that epithelial tissue have no blood supply. Since they are avascular, nutrients and oxygen are supplied through diffusion from underlying tissues. Observe the following simple epithelia. First, simple squamous epithelium. Take note of the thin, flat, and irregularly shaped cells. They line the heart, blood, and lymphatic vessels, body cavities, and alveoli, air sacs of the lungs. Examine a prepared slide of a simple squamous epithelium or whole mount under the LPU and HPU and identify all visible parts. The second one is simple cuboidal epithelium. Examine a prepared slide of kidney tubule. Use the HPO to close examine the wall of the tubules. Take note that the cube-shaped cells that line the kidney tubules. This type of cells can also be seen lining the ovaries and secretory parts of certain glands. The third is simple columnar epithelium. Examine the slide of the frog's small intestine or stomach under the LPU. Locate the finger-like folds called villi of the small intestine. These folds are lined with columnar cells. Look for elongated cells with a nucleus generally near the bottom and often ciliated on the outer surface. Turn to HPO and carefully examine individual columnar cells of the villi and identify all visible parts. The second types are connective tissue. Carefully observe the feature of These tissues that makes it bind parts together, fill in spaces, and provide support for other types of tissue. Notice that these tissues have fewer cells but with more intercellular substances, or matrix or ground substances, than the epithelial tissues. The matrix is variable in type and amount. It is one of the differentiating features of the various types of connective tissues. In vertebrates, connective tissue proper includes both loose connective tissues composed of fibers and fixed and wandering cells suspended in a syrupy ground substances, and dense connective tissue or tendons and ligaments are largely composed of tightly packed fibers. Other types of connective tissue include the vascular tissues, blood, lymph, and tissue fluid. Vascular tissue is found in a fluid ground substance called the plasma. The connective tissues have the parts. First is the cartilage. Cartilage is a semi-rigid connective tissue embedded in a gel-like matrix. Examine a cross-section of a hyaline cartilage under LPO and HPO. Look for these parts: chondrocytes or chondriocytes, cartilage cells. Lacunae or singular lacuna means cavities containing the cartilage cells. Bone, osseous tissues. Examine a cross-section of the bone under the LPO carefully. Observe the different structures and their arrangement. Take note of the calcified matrix with calcium salts organized around collagen fibers arranged in concentric rings called lamella. Under HPO, focus on a single Harvesian system and identify all the parts. Osteocytes or bone cells. Lacunae or cavities where bone cells are lodged. Canaliculi or small canals that interconnect the lacunae to distribute the cellular materials. Harvesian canal or the central canal with blood supply or vascular. Osteon or Harvesian system or entire elongated cylinder unit of the rings. The osteon is the structural and functional unit of a bone. Blood. Take note that in fresh specimen, this tissue is made up of the fluid portion or plasma and the formed elements or cells, corpuscles, and fragments. These cells are red blood corpuscles, and second is leukocytes or white blood cells, and the third is thrombocytes or blood platelets. Examine a papered slide of a human blood smear and a frog blood smear. Focus them under the LPU and HPU. Take note of the differences in terms of shape and size of cells and the presence or absence of the nucleus in each cell. Third is adipose. Examine a prepared slide of adipose tissue under LPU and HPU. Look for large soap bubbles-like structures or signet rings with nucleus and cytoplasm pushed to one side. This is a loose connective tissue that stores lipid, cushions, supports, and insulates organs and acts as filler tissue. The third is muscle tissues. Observe that muscle tissue is composed of elongated cells called muscle fibers, specialized for contractions. This specialized function of contraction is exclusive for muscle tissues. Muscle tissues are the most common tissue in the body of higher animals. Muscle tissues has each part. The first is skeletal muscle. Secure a prepared slide or striated skeletal muscle and examine it under the LPU and HPU. Muscle fibers or muscle cells, elongated, unbranched, and multinucleated fibers. Stratia or transverse, alternating dark and light bands. The second is cardiac muscle tissues. Examine the cross-section of the cardiac muscle under the LPU and HPU. Note the light and dark bands like those exhibited in skeletal muscles. Observe that the fibers seem to anastomose with the adjacent ones. Interconnecting branch fibers. In the intervals along the fibers find the thin, dark, intercalated disc which is characteristic of the cardiac muscle. The third is smooth or visceral muscle tissue. Examine a cross-section of a frog's stomach under the LPU. Move the slide to the cellular layer of muscle. Using the HPU, focus on a spindle-shaped fiber which has a nucleus at the center of the widest portion of the cell body. The fourth, and the last is nervous tissues. The nervous tissues is made up of two elements, the neuron or nerve cell and the neuroglia cells. Neurons are connected with the transmission of impulses, specialized to receive and transmit impulses from one part of the body to the other parts. Refer to the figure of a neuron. Take note of the following parts. Cell body. It contains the nucleus and the thread-like processes. Second is neurolima, or the cell membrane. Dendrites, the processes that conduct impulse towards the cell body. The last is axon, conducts impulse towards from the cell body. Reproductive tissues. The reproductive cells are produced by the gonads. The male gonads or testes produce the spermatozoa or sperm cells. The female gonads or ovaries produce the ovum or egg cell. The ovum or egg cell. Examine under the LPO the frog's ovary. Focus one foliate with cells at different stages of development and take note of the following parts. Oocyte. Through ovum surrounded by follicle cells, granulosa cells, multi-layered cohort of follicle cells surrounding the ovum that secrete the fluid that accumulates in the extracellular spaces and baths the oocyte. Zona pellucida, a cellular membrane between the oocyte and granulosa cells. Antrum, space between the ovum and granulosa cells. Graphian follicles, a follicles with large antrum. Spermatozoa or sperm cell. Examine a prepared slide of human sperm cell under HPU. Identify the following. Acrosome, cup-like and found at the anterior portion of the head of a sperm. Head contains the nucleus with the genetic materials. Centriole, present in the basal plates of sperm's head, give rise to the axoneme of the flagellum. Mitochondria, site of ATP production to support the cell motility. Middle piece or mid-piece, portion that contains the mitochondria. Flagellum or toll, the long whip-like structure used for movement.